Welcome back to the Mom Mentality Show. My name is Austin Chadwick and co-host is Chris Lucian. And today we're going to be responding to some feedback from the community. John will put his link in the show notes. In his tweet, he asked us, we'd like to see some more specific details, like what goes on in learning time. So we're going to jump into that today and tell some stories of what happens during our dedicated learning time. And so I guess to kick it off, Chris, can you give like a really short description of dedicated learning time and then jump into some examples? It'd be awesome.
Yeah. So dedicated learning time, essentially is exactly that, right? So you set aside time that the team is going to be learning, and typically this is not something that you sacrifice because there was overtime or your schedule is crunched or whatever, right? It's kind of a sharpening of the saw opportunity. This idea that you can improve your skills to move faster, and there's a concrete, I think, idea that doing the dedicated learning time will net you a better speed than using that time to do development. So like that, I think that's like a key concept of it. But set aside a certain number of hours. So for our team, it's essentially 7 hours a week, an hour each weekday, and then 2 hours on the end of the day on Friday. And it, I think maybe started, pretty strict and round robin, strong style pairing practices that, worked on tic-tac-toe katas and things like that. And then gradually, as the team became more and more involved, there were different practices that kind of came out of it. Maybe I'll tell a bit of a story about the 12 days of index, which is a pretty interesting thing when we first started doing these sorts of things. It was basically, in general, these are deliberate practices sessions that can lead to the team being faster. I don't know if you want anything you want to add to that, Austin?
Yeah. So I think, specific examples that come to mind for me, or were you asking specifically about the index thing?
No. Specifically about your thoughts on what learning time is, maybe
gotcha.
As an abstract.
In the abstract, yes. And so, I think, I won't go too deep into it because we have a kind of an episode describing why. And so we'll link that in the show notes as well. But I think it's basically to incentivize innovation and growth and learning without people having to have to do it in their overtime, which only people with certain work-life balances can afford to learn outside of work. And it actually incentivizes people with very busy lives outside of work to not grow and not get better in a lot of things. And so it's just time set aside for that to increase the innovation and increase the learning in your culture and your organization. And so, And so some examples that come to mind for me on how it gets used is, one really simple example is just solo learning, right? And so that could be, hey, I got a little code project. I want to learn about technology stack XYZ. So I'm going to create a little app using that technology stack XYZ. It's going to be very hands-on. You create it, you do it. I've seen people do a lot of passion projects where like, oh, I have this hobby A on the side. And so I'm going to learn this tech stack, making an app about this hobby. I've also seen it done for jokes, internal inside jokes and things. And so, but they really learn the technology really, really well, and then do something fun alongside of it. I've seen people do it for things that directly apply and ultimately become production code. It can be very hands off as far as just gaining new information. So it could be watching videos, doing Pluralsight courses, or Udemy, or any of these other things. And so reading books, listen to the audiobooks. It could tie into someone's growth goals. So we have a process where people work with a mentor, work with others, and collectively discover, hey, I want to get better interpersonal skills. So they might read Crucial Conversations or 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, or craftsmanship, right? So they might read a book on design patterns. So those are some of the solo things that come to mind for me. And then before we jump to collective examples, any other solo things jump out to you, Chris?
Just in general, like the title of the book, but in actuality, automating the boring stuff. So it might just be an exercise in learning to take something that you do repetitively and automate it. Even as so it's not quite maybe learning directly, but I think that if you had a really clear idea of how you would automate something that you do on a regular basis, it would, you would have done it already, right? So I think that there's this idea that there's probably things that you do repetitively that you haven't automated that you could potentially automate, and maybe that's learning OCR or something, character recognition to read images and stuff. But the main idea is that there's probably some kind of stretch goal for you to even reduce the time you spend on other things in general. So and big fan of books, audiobooks, those sorts of things, and katas in general, that you could do by yourself or in a group.
Nice. Right on. Yeah. And I think what you said reminded me of what I've seen pretty often, especially if you're on a small mob or team, it's just a small group of people, and you encounter a problem together while mobbing, and then your time together to mob ends, and immediately it's someone's learning time. And what I'll notice, and sometimes like I'm signing off because I do my learning time early in the morning before our mobbing sessions, so I'm starting to sign off, but I still see the AnyDesk session, and you see someone in their learning time start to go automate a problem they saw because it was bothering them, right?
Yeah.
And it's fun. You can totally do that in the non-learning time, so to speak, and it should totally be done. But I see people, they recognize a problem and they just want to take care of it right now, right? And so that's been really fun to see. And then you come to mob the next morning and they have this beautiful solution to present on, hey, now we don't have to do that thing anymore because now it's automated, or now it's obvious. You can just read it and you just read the code, or you just read the test, and it's just super obvious as what's going on. Where before it was kind of a mystery, right? And so it's been really fun to see the interplay between the two things, where I think it's a good boost to autonomy. You can do that. You have that autonomy to do it during mobbing time. Like, hey, I'm going to go try this thing, or let's do this thing together. But it's nice that time is set aside so the system is incentivizing it, as opposed to it an interrupt driven thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, in an environment without learning time, it's very unlikely that would get done, just because of interrupting the flow or crunch or whatever that might be. And so, very similar to traffic jams on a freeway, if there is no slack in the system, then, certain optimizations mid-process just do not happen, because you're just concentrated on moving forward 5 feet, but not hitting the car in front of you when they stop right away. And so, that traffic jam analogy is a very good observation from the perspective of both flow efficiency and lean software development. And I think that dedicated learning time or dedicated time for those activities is extremely important.
Nice. Yeah. So I think I have one final question for you, Chris, but before I get to that, I wanted to share on the topic of collective learning. So it's not always solo. Often groups will get together, so it could be a book club. It could be we often do an open space style learning together, where people put up topics. Hey, I'm going to go in this virtual room and learn about X, Y, and Z. Or, hey, I'm working with students at the college down the street. Does anybody want to join me and help me teach them test-driven development? So you'll see collective things pop up, and sometimes it could be just a problem from the regular work that someone really wants to solve. They're really into it, and they want to solve it, and they want help. And so what it really helps with is when it's collective is it starts to cross-pollinate, right? And so, it'll be interesting to see a topic post up from another team and be like, oh, I can really help with that. I've also seen group learning sessions start because someone has a problem in one team and they're reaching out for help to another team. And so what they'll do is they'll post a group learning together, and then they'll go solve that problem together. And so there's been lots of, I even saw one this morning. You'll see like a mob session start during learning time, and you can see who's in it. And you realize that they're cross-pollinating and learning and building on something that they're going to present to their mob. And it just gives a nice opportunity where someone doesn't feel like, it's totally fine to break away from your mob and go help it out another mob. But it's nice to have space where you're not, again, interrupting. It's incentivizing that cross-pollination as opposed to someone has to kind of swim upstream a little bit to make it happen. And so, did you have any other collective learning time examples that come to mind?
This is probably a good time for the 12 days of index kind of discussion.
Sure.
So, in early days of mobbing, this would have been 10 years ago. We a lot of the team wrote a lot of ASP.NET, and we transitioned to MVC. And in that, there were people on the team that really had a hard time with it, and others that it came very naturally. And so, there were developers on the team that just it was not super clicking, right? And so it was like, okay, well, let's do very similar to the 12 Days of Christmas song, where you kind of start over from the beginning every time and then re-go through all the process. We did the 12 Days of Index, which is like an index action using Razor views and ASP.NET MVC. And the paradigms were pretty different at the time between ASP.NET and ASP.NET MVC. And so, we would just kind of like throw it away each day, start over, and just try and rewrite the action over and over again, and start each time. And so, that 12 days style, I guess is what I call it. But and I think probably Woody had come up with that name for it. But the idea is that you kind of throw it away, start over, do a little bit more, throw it away, start over, do a little bit more. And so that was a really great experience, because everybody on the team got really good at just producing these things. This pretty repetitive thing, and eventually it was completely automated. We just kind of reverse engineered database schemas later, but I don't think that would have been possible for anybody to follow had they not really totally understood how the MVC actions were working. So that was a really cool one. So that 12 days style, where like maybe somebody's closer to an expert can work on it. And then Willem Larson's code cooking, which I really like and promote a lot, but I don't think there's a lot out there written on it. But code cooking is this idea that somebody kind of at an expert level teaches somebody at a novice level something that is done through a REPL. So it requires a REPL, and then the expert person writes a command into the REPL, and then the novice person repeats it. But you're not allowed to talk at all during this process. And then the expert person just gets more and more advanced with the REPL. And if they can't accomplish what it was, then they show a simpler example. And so you go up and down in difficulty in the REPL, and the person at the novice level is repeating those things as they go. And so that was a really cool experience, and definitely something that you can do with 2 or more people. And also, just katas in general. I mentioned the tic-tac-toe kata, but also Emily Bache's tennis refactoring kata and other refactoring katas are really cool, because I think it's less common in our industry to run into people that have a lot of refactoring experience, and so those are great methods to get people together as a group and mob those things.
Cool. Well, I got one more question for you, and that is, let's get really relevant on what's happening right now, Chris. So what are you doing in your learning time right now?
So let's see. Lots and lots of Python. I've spent a lot of, I do a lot of learning around the differences between deep learning and shallow learning in Python. And also, a lot of books on innovation and, high level business level organization. The Innovator's Dilemma, I think, is one of the more recent books that I've read. yeah, and then also joining other people for their learning sessions so that I can hear about the things that they're experiencing and then participate in the learning as well. So how about you, Austin?
All right. Well, what I've been learning this week, I'm weird with my learning time. Some people will focus on one thing, and in each learning session, they're working on that one thing. I have this kind of like rotation going on. I think in education circles, it's called a loop, where you do like a little bit of this, and then it's like turn to the next page on learning B, and then work on it, and then go to learning the next learning and turn the page on that. And so the things I've been doing is one, I've been going through, I'm almost through all the clean coder videos. So I'll put a link in the show notes. And so the most recent one I'm doing has been on acceptance testing. Then I'll be jumping into F#. But a lot of them lay a really strong foundation on test-driven development and refactoring and agility and those kind of things. And so, yeah, so I think I'm about 2/3 the way through all those videos. So those have been great. I'm also been doing, so I'm always wanting to grow in refactoring and testing. And then the other area is whatever tech I'm working in right now. So if you asked me a year ago, it was a lot of web and cloud. And right now it's a lot of Python and database. And so I just finished a Python course, and I think I'll do a Python unit testing course next. And then the other thing is videos and books. So I love doing audiobook because, for inside of work, you can just listen to it, right? And it's great. But even if you are going to try to, sneak it in as in your regular life, is it just, if you're in a commute, if you drive, or if you're getting ready, or if you're alone in the house doing dishes, you can listen to an audiobook anywhere. And so I get about, thanks to your suggestion, Chris, I'm now at 2.5 speed on books. I used to listen to them at 1 the speed. And if it's a really like high quality, like more storytelling book, I'll tune it down to 1. But if it's a lot of just like expositional content, I'll bump it up to 2.5. And so, yeah, lately I did, I have a loop within that. So I'll go tech to agility, lean, or generic business. And I just swap back and forth. And so I just did the Pragmatic Programmer's book. And then I just finished a book on Netflix culture. And now I'm doing a book called Death by Meetings. So we can put links to the show notes in these. But so a lot of book recommendations sent to me. I'll get through them. I think I get about through a book or 2 a month at that rate. Yeah, it's been really, really fun. And what's incredible is some of the stuff doesn't feel super relevant, but as soon as you learn it, you start seeing it everywhere, right? And so, Death by Meeting is not a mob programming book at all. But while you're mob programming, you realize like, oh, what makes discussion and interaction really engaging, and what makes meetings really engaging. And I guess in some ways, mobbing is kind of like a working meeting. So, yeah.
Have you ever read anything on learning how to learn better?
Oh, yes.
So the reason I
Yes.
ask is because what you're reminding me of lessons that I learned from Barbara Oakley's book about interleafing, or Angela Duckworth of and grit, right? And so the regular rotation can be referred to as interleafing. And often it's paired with recall, that maybe sometimes it's just context and pulling that stuff up again. But I think a good place for some people to start is, especially if you're going to start your way on this journey, is start by learning how to learn. And yeah. How does the human brain do those things? And I think it's kind of interesting because I came about this sort of thinking in a roundabout way, because I think that learning about machine learning improved my own actual learning, because a lot of the machine learning models are based off of the way that human brains work. And so I learned a lot about learning from machine learning and incorporated that into my own learning. But there are books out there that specifically study the science of human learning that I think are really valuable reads as well, that can then lead into, like, why would you do a tic-tac-toe kata over and over again for months on end? Well,
Yeah.
there's refinement and recall and a lot of things, a lot of benefits that you get from doing that.
Yeah, exactly. And that goes to a book we both just read recently, which is The Atomic Habit. So, right. So developing habit. And yeah, and so I'm kind of weird with education. I've done some learning on kind of modern takes on it, on learning and education. Those are very helpful. I've also done kind of more of a side hobby for my kids and my own life and family is learning from education. So my wife's in the teaching space. I've been to education conferences with her. I've read books from ancient times, from now, and it's really fun to see how often modern things are just rediscoveries of ancient things, and then they give cool new language to it, and people are like, "Oh, I want to go do that," And so, it's pretty cool. And so, even things like Socratic discussion and how a mob is really engaging because it's kind of a Socratic discussion about code and how to have good Socratic discussions and ones that aren't abrasive, and how conversation really helps you learn. And so, yeah, a ton of stuff like that. But again, I think it's one of those things where everything's connected, right? And there's no silo that's unrelated to nothing. Maybe there are, but it's hard to find them, I suppose.
Yep.
Cool.
Absolutely. And so for all of you out there, all of our viewers and listeners, what do you think about learning and dedicated learning time during the workday? Please let us know. If you know somebody that you think this episode could really help them in their way they think about learning and being productive in general, then you might share this with them. And please like, subscribe, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.